Okay, so today is October 9th, 2019, and I'm here to interview Miss Suzette Foster-Jemmott, right? Okay, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so please introduce yourself and provide a little background about your current role.
So my name is Suzette Foster-Jemmott. I am the business manager for York College, and that involves just managing the financial operations of the college, financial statements, accounts payable, tuition, um, a lot of administrative services and things of that nature.
Okay, so who were your role models growing up?
So my role models growing up, I would have to say, were I had two elementary school teachers who were really influential to me, and not for any particular reason, but more so because they look like me. And when I say that, they were African American women who just were um, leaders and kind of helped to kind of shape just how I thought and especially in those young years, you're like 8, 9, 10. So they really had just an effect on me about just kind of work ethic and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, I would say certainly my parents, my father, particularly just because he was just always a hard worker. And so, he worked just to provide for us. So that was always just, I certainly noticed that growing up. And so he's been a role model for me.
Did they work in higher education too, or?
No, my dad was he worked for Con Edison, so he worked on like gas lines and things like that, and would work outside all day and long hours, and so some days we didn't see him because he left early and came home late, but you knew that he was working and taking care of us. My mom did. My mother worked for like an insurance company and whatever they do at insurance companies.
Okay, so before I go into the next question, I just want to ask, can you give us a little background about your education?
Sure. So I, went to New York City public schools. Nothing particularly special, like none of the specialized high schools, but just regular public school. And then I went to Baruch College for undergrad, and then I got my MBA from SUNY Empire State.
Okay, great. And then, so referencing that, what do you think was more important for your leadership development? Was it your education? Did you get more for leadership from the education and just the actual work experience and life experience in general?
I think the leadership portion comes more from experience for me. Not that education doesn't help, but I think just the leadership just comes from experience, and for me more so experience on how I've been treated in the past and how I'd like to be treated. So I try to treat people the way I'd want to, someone to treat me if they were my superior.
Okay. All right. So let's see. And now, so when you were like a subordinate or whatever positions you were at before, did you have a goal of getting into a position of leadership, or do you feel like you kind of just progressively gravitated towards it?
I've always had a goal of upward movement, So, you know, I think there was a natural progression in all of the positions that I've had to just um, move up. I think that should be everyone's goal. We shouldn't certainly stay in one position just because, you know, that's what we like. I mean, and not to say that anything's wrong with that, because there isn't. Some folks are good with just doing what they do, but for me particularly, I've always had the goal of moving up and moving into leadership roles, because that's just always been just a personal goal of mine. You know, I've I've never necessarily been satisfied with just being a worker, but I want to, you know, I want to sit at the table too and be a part of making the decisions, and that will, you know, ultimately have impact on other people. And I think I've certainly kind of grown into that. I wouldn't say that was my goal kind of starting out working per se. But as the years go by, you know, I think that's something that I've certainly grown into.
Okay. And then, so before you came to York, were you also in a leadership position, maybe at a different level? Like, so was this another step in the progression, or was this like a lateral move?
This move was more. So title-wise, it was kind of a lateral move, but for me, it was an upward progression, because in my prior position, the responsibilities were a little bit different, in that it was a much smaller organization, so there just wasn't as many arms, so to speak, of areas that I was responsible for. So the overall title was kind of a lateral move, but I gained more of the campus experience here at York, meaning that, you know, there's athletics and student life and, you know, performing arts centers and things like that, where in my prior institution, it was more of a graduate program, and, you know, it was just a different environment, so there wasn't as much
encompassing of the entire
correct.
college
There wasn't
experience.
as much exposure to the college experience. I mean, and it was kind of give and take, because in that position, I managed a lot more areas, kind of on the financial side of things. For example, like I managed budget and, you know, research foundation in those areas, where I don't necessarily do that here, just because it was small enough that a person could manage that at that campus, versus here, where it's just not feasible for one person to do all of that. So there were, you know, certainly gives and takes, but I wanted the experience, the campus experience, as part of, you know, my portfolio. So that was the main reason.
A bigger challenge, right? Okay. So during this time, say post graduate school, or even during, or could even be in your undergrad or whatever, so who was your most important mentor, and what did you learn from them regarding leadership? Was there any single person that really helped you take it to like the next level?
In graduate school?
Well, wouldn't necessarily be in school, but either or. Was there somebody, maybe there was a professor that really inspired you, or somebody that you worked with that pushed you to try to even achieve more?
So I wouldn't say in graduate school, but I think certainly in one of my first places of employment, the then controller there, she was really influential to me because she kind of just pushed me to, do more and do better, and kind of instilled a certain ethic, like as if, your work day doesn't necessarily end at 5 o'clock because that's your schedule time. But if there are things that, need to be done and deadlines that need to be met, you need to be here. Like, there was just a certain level of work that was expected that, I'm thankful that that was kind of one of my jobs early on. So I had just, learned that way of thinking versus kind of just punching the clock, so to speak, where it's just like I'm in and I'm out, and this is it, because there's just so much more that happens. And I think that sort of kind of separates folks who are going to just, go to work, or, are you going to really get the job done? And it just, sometimes more is required. And and not to say that you can't do a job in a 9 to 5 day, but sometimes it goes beyond that. And so my boss at that time, she was just really like, she just pushed to instill that type of work ethic in me, and kind of like, you work hard now to get to a place where you don't necessarily have to work as hard, and I think I still work hard, but I certainly, certainly nothing the way it used to be. I mean, she really ran quite an operation, and sometimes you need to be like that. But I think, she was certainly influential in just me as a younger professional, and how I want to work and what I want my work to be,
And do you think she came across as like, not like somebody that's like just purely driving people to get the job done, but do you think she came across as like a true leader? Like, she was fair about everything, and she was inspiring too, or was it?
She was certainly inspiring to me.
Without being too hard on people?
Yeah. I think she was, hard when she needed to be, but also just like, this needs to be done. And there was a certain project where it was almost like a test. Like, she gave it to me. She said, if you can get this done, you'll be good, basically. Like, it'll just, and it was more a challenge for me to do. Like, can I do this? Am I able to do this? And just within myself, and not necessarily like, let me do this for anything in particular. But if she's like, if you can do this and manage this, then this will set you up moving forward. And I think I certainly learned a lot at that place, at that organization, from just the way that they worked. I would never go back there just because they were a little crazy, but it certainly laid the foundation on how I think, how I think about my work.
It sounds like she was also setting you up, or maybe helping you train your mind to see the bigger picture too. So like, even though it's like focus and get the task done, but you start to look at the overall.
Yeah, I mean, she was definitely like, you could be me, basically, but this is what I had to do, and you can grow, you can get here, but you need to do this, this, and this first. And my whole thinking is that there's always more. And so, even in my current position, I'm always like, well, there's more than this. And I always don't necessarily realize that until I get to more, and then I realize that there's more than that, and I'm like, oh, there's more than this. How can I get there? So sometimes it's about positioning yourself, and being at the table so that the folks who are at more know you and see you and recognize that you can do more as well. So I think she definitely instilled in that with me, and I saw her progression from even when I started there to where she's at now. Like, she started there as kind of like an accounting manager, and I think now she's like CFO and just has just moved up, in the organization, and I think she just has, certainly the skill set and the drive to just do that, and that sometimes just comes with time too, because every organization is different, so you have to learn the organization and what's gonna, work. That particular organization was a hospital, which is completely different from higher education, even in the way you do financials, and the terminology and stuff like that. So it's just part of that is also just learning too. But I would say she was pretty influential in just being an example of kind of where you could go.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, before I go into the next question, I want to make sure we're not having any technical difficulties.
Okay.
Excuse me 1 second. Looks like we are good. Cool. Okay, so the next question is kind of starting to go into a little bit of like the theory and how people view leadership. So basically the most basic element of leadership theory is basically some people believe that people are just born leaders, and it's just you're born with it, you have it. And the other side to that coin is that you can learn to be a leader. So do you feel like people are born leaders, or is it more something that you can learn? Or is it?
I think it's a combination. I think certainly some folks are definitely born to be leaders, and you can kind of see that just by the way that they move and operate, and they kind of just think on their, they don't necessarily follow the crowd per se, but just do, their own thing. Even little kids, you can kind of see who's going to be the leader versus who's the follower. I think that it's something that can be, I wouldn't say learned. I think you certainly have to have some, just qualities, but I think it could be groomed, and massaged so that, and I think one of the things that's important for a leader to do is to groom the people that they're leading, because I think, we certainly owe it to folks to challenge them and to, if they're accepting, because not everyone wants to be challenged. So certainly if they're accepting, we need to groom them. So I think everyone can be groomed if they have that mindset and if they're willing to take that grooming.
Like some people can't take criticism or even any type of instruction if it is focused back on them.
Correct.
So they're like, oh, it's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah, and I think I think leadership per se. I mean, I don't necessarily think of it as like a leader, but I like to think that there is a collaborative effort, to work, and I always try to not necessarily put myself in a place where I'm superior per se, I mean, I like to talk to my staff or whatever, just as colleagues, because I think it's just, I just have that level of respect for people, so I don't want to necessarily or ever present myself as like I'm the boss, do what I say, that type of thing, because I don't think that gets far, you know.
It's not very effective, right? Okay. So the next question is still kind of dealing with leadership theory. So do you think, so leaders can be groomed, right? But do you think that like certain people are best suited to lead in certain situations? Like somebody could maybe be a leader of a company but couldn't lead and inspire maybe for a nonprofit and be able to deal with people and raise money. Like, so basically what I'm saying is like, if a person is a leader, do you think they are adaptable, or it should just be this person is probably best for this? Because maybe they have a certain quality, this person is best for this situation, even though they might be both leaders in their own right.
I think so. I think there are certain areas, people have their areas of expertise, you know, that will make them an effective leader. Like, I could never be an advancement because I'm just not an outgoing person, as opposed, like, and when I say that, you know, to approach people and to talk to people, and certainly not to ask them for money. So that just could never be anything that I would do. Just like I could never be a salesperson because I'm just not that person. And so I think you have to understand what your strengths are, and then, you know, take that and use that to help, you know, and lead in that respect. So, you know, I remember when I interviewed, and BP Thomas was like, well, what do you want to do in 5 years, or, you know, where do you see yourself, type of things, like, could you be president? And I was just like, no, I don't want to be president, because you have to raise money to be a president. That's one of their jobs. Right. And I could never do that. I said, no, I could be VP because I can count the money, and, you know, I can certainly make sure that it's, you know, spent appropriately, or, you know, accounted for accurately. But president is not something that I necessarily would want to do, because that is not something that I think I would be effective in. You know what I mean? So I think certainly people have their areas of expertise. Like, I couldn't be Steve Jobs because I'm not like techie like that, or, you know. I also think though that leadership, you know, part of being a leader is certainly getting the right people around you to, you know, to support you. So a leader is only as good as kind of their team and who they are entrusting to work for them and work with them on things. Because, you know, I think part of leadership also is trying to delegate appropriately, so that the overall job still happens and still gets done. And so, but to answer your question, I think there are certain areas, people, you know, kind of have certain areas of expertise that will make them better leaders in that area, you know. So a perfect example is President Trump, right? So he was a, you know, I mean, a business mogul, and did and did well on the business side,
and
real estate, and a celebrity and things like that. But he's not necessarily a good president, you know, just in my opinion. I know this is not political, but
I understand.
He probably is not the right person to be president, you know, because that's just not his thing. And so, not taking away from anything he's done in the business world, but that's just not for him. You know, he should have probably stayed on the real estate side or whatever.
Gotcha. Okay, so you kind of touched on this already, speaking about teams and treating people how you want to be treated. So I want to see if maybe we could just go a little more in depth about how important the human element of being a leader is. So not the technical not the overarching ideas, but just the way that you communicate and deal with people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how important is it to you?
I think it's very important. I think that you know, you certainly need to be approachable. You need to folks need to be able to be comfortable enough to speak to you aside from the work per se. You know, there's a fine line that I think exists because while you want to be approachable, you also need to be respected. And so I think people will certainly blur that line and test that line and move it as much as you allow them to. And so it's kind of, you have to learn who you're dealing with in order to deal with them appropriately. Because everyone, you know, there's so many different types of people and personalities that you come encounter with when you are working.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is certainly a fine line that gets drawn, and you need to kind of balance that. I like to be certainly level set with my, you know, my staff on just speaking and them speaking to me. But I also want to make sure that it's understood that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I'm the manager here, and so, you know, this is how things are going to go. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like I've, you know, balanced that enough. You know, I don't like to be like a micromanager or a, you know, a stickler. Like, I'm just not that type of person.
Mm-hmm.
But I also am very aware of, you know, what's happening, who's taking advantage, who's, you know, doing the work, and who's just kind of skating by. And I certainly see it and I'm aware of it. And so that just is something. So I may not necessarily be, you know, doing write-ups and that kind of stuff because that just takes a lot of time and effort. But
Mm-hmm.
if it comes to that, I certainly will. And you know, I've had to, you know, take those steps in some instances. But I just think that it's important to you know, have good relationship with you know, your employees, so that you know, you are always approachable and always, you know, able to understand what's going on. Because at the end of the day, everyone here is human. We all have lives. We all have, you know, families. We all have things that are going on. And sometimes, you know, that tends to interrupt the workday, you know,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better term. And we need to be understandable to that. And because if, you know, things were on my side, or it was something that I needed to do or take care of, or something as simple as, you know, I have a doctor's appointment, I have to, you know, leave early.
Mm-hmm.
We should be understandable that things are going on every day in everyone's life, and so there's just a human element. We need to be able to be understandable to that, and certainly accommodating to those other elements that are going on outside of work.
Yeah, you're taking more into account than just job has to get done.
Right,
I don't care what else
right.
is going on.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be like that. And I certainly wouldn't want to be like that. I think, you know, it just doesn't, it's not right. And I'd also want that same level of accommodation if I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that sometimes, you know, like I said, you know, the lines can get pushed, and so you just have to kind of, you know, make sure that is balanced and feel out if it's something that's, you know, if somebody's trying to take advantage of you, or if there is, really just that need, and so I think I've, done a good job of that, and I'm certainly just understanding too all of the other stuff that happened just outside of work, there were a number of things, so I tried to just be as human as possible.
And you think that helps in getting, like keeping people focused on the task because you're not pushing them too hard and you are understandable of the situation, so they feel more willing to work with you to get the job done?
I think so. I mean, I think that, or I would like to think that, folks appreciate that, and so, and they understand that, if there is something that is their responsibility, that it needs to be done, and so, let's say if, I left early today because I needed to take care of something, I know that I still have to do this, and so I just, I think that happens usually, and, I haven't necessarily had issue with that, and I'm just, I hope that people, appreciate that, so.
Okay. So the next question, so the human element, going back to leadership theory, they basically assert that like this as president, no matter what level you're at, if you're like a low level manager, mid, or if you're the president, of an organization, there's two other, basically like they call them skills, but basically there's two other elements, which is like the technical element and conceptual, that's kind of something that leaders and managers deal with and have to apply maybe more so one or the other depending on what level of the organization they're in. So like the point you're at, do you feel like you are more like technically driven, like dealing with the ins and outs of the task, or are you more involved with the conceptual element of the, basically it would be like of the ideas and the support of the college?
So I feel like I'm kind of in the middle, and I personally have always wanted to understand the technical, because at the end of the day, I'm responsible for these areas, and so if something, for example, if you're not here one day or you're out for whatever reason and inventory needs to get done, like I need to know how to scan things and upload it and all that stuff and make sure that happens, and so I feel like I usually try to stay close to the technical side because I want to also understand what I'm talking about and not just speak a language that I don't understand. So I've always tried to do things, even if I'm gonna do it like once or twice. I've tried to, for every area, and I know I haven't scanned the machine yet, but I've done it in the past. I've done it at my other campus, so I know
Right, that was a small area.
Right, how to do it. I know what's involved in it. Now it'd be a lot different here just because there's so much more items, but if I needed to do it, I can do it, and it may not be as exact as you do it or as precise just because it's not something that I do every day, but I feel like I just, for my level of comfort, I need to be certainly familiar with all of the technicality of everybody's job. So if I need to do a financial statement on my own, I can do that. Or if I gotta voucher something, I can do that. Or if I have to cut a check, I can do that. And so it may be, I may stumble through it, and I may not cut a check as quickly or as swiftly as Alan does, just because he's doing it like this.
Yeah.
But I need to know how to do it and just what to do. So that's something that I try to stay close to, and at least make sure that I'm aware of. Conceptually, I feel like I certainly am involved on that level as well. And so a lot of what I'm doing, I feed upwards, and I try to place things on the radar of other folks, and certainly give my 2 or 3 cents about things, because if I see something that's just not going well, it's my responsibility to say that. And an example of that, particularly that happened recently, was with continuing ed, where we were talking about like launching the summer program and just all of the stuff behind it. And because I know technically this is not going to work, because we're not going to make money, we're probably not even going to break even on this, because I have been involved in the technical side. I was able to voice that to the VP and basically say, this is not a good idea. And that subsequently, went up to the president, and so a decision was made to not do that program. And then we ultimately put the program on hiatus, just because there needed to be some stuff that happened conceptually in order to make it work well and be profitable. So I think for me, I feel like I'm kind of in the middle, but I also don't want to be in a position where I don't understand the weeds, so to speak, because sometimes I've sat at tables where folks talk and they don't know what they're talking about. And so you kind of have to jump in like, well, really, this is what happens, or this is how it goes. And so I don't